Good afternoon, everybody. Pleasure to be with you, and thank you for Carl and for Heffer for the brilliant presentation already by Carl, which really does put me straight into what I want to talk to you about today, which is really making my case for culture analytics. It probably is a weird term. You may have come across it, you may have not. And I'm here really because of having 20 years been involved in the largest quantitative study ever done with the eve of the launch of the book, to tell you a little bit more, and that's my challenge in 15 minutes, to try and summarize all that research and the book in just those few minutes. But luckily I can give you the few important nuggets. So my first thing I want to talk about is, why should you care? You know, we often talk about culture. I've been here to several presentations today which have addressed culture. Even I love the one just before our session about being agile transformation. So they all make the case for the importance of culture. But really, why should you care? And the only thing I want to remind us, I don't want to be the doom and gloom, but sadly, we quickly blame culture as often the villain when things don't go so well. And just to bring you some interesting stories that I'm sure you've all come across, the Boeing story where, gosh, I think I've counted about the word culture being named over 382 times when there were some of the leaders being questioned about what happened at Boeing. And we know the result for culture, that sadly meant that the products that they were manufacturing weren't really as good as they should have been, which is quite scary for a brilliant safety culture organization. But go on, think about the plethora of examples that we have around Dieselgate, which was quite a horrid story as well from some of the best trusted brands, or the Enron case, and I keep going. There's a plethora of them out there. So the truth is, culture becomes very important, and I would argue it is a key leading indicator. So what do we want out of culture? It's very simple. We want culture to drive performance. We want it to allow people to do great things every day at work. But we also want culture to stop us doing horrid things. So it's that continuous challenge between risk and reward that we want out of culture. Is it possible? Is that equilibrium possible? Well, of course, I would argue it is. It's in the book, you'll be glad to know. And ultimately, what is the problem that we're trying to solve? Well, the truth is that when we often address culture, three things tend to come out at us, and came out at me at my research. My key findings was, one, we rely on our leaders to go and write the values that we kind of expect for people to live in the organization. What we tend to do is send them away for the away days. Maybe it's in a spa, we wrap them with enough towels, and they'll come up with 3, 4, 5 words that get enshrined in our reception. And the truth is that it's not ground up. So what we don't know is, are we walking the talk? Do we actually behave these values, or are they just fashionable words? The second key issue is, how do you measure culture? That's a difficult one. Well, we tend to rely on whatever data we have. So whether it's right or wrong, we look at mostly lagging indicators. Has the performance been great? Has the revenue been up? Are we profitable or not? Are people engaged? Are employees happy to be here? What is common with all those measurements, which I don't have a problem with, they are all lagging indicators. Once they happened, you're kind of late. You can't change that because it's the narrative of the outcome. The third thing, which I find fascinating around culture, I think we talked about this just before I came on, which I love what Vodafone are doing there. Can we connect our culture metrics with our outcome metrics? You know, it's not wrong to do that. And often we talk about culture in kind of fuzzy terms, but rarely do we really connect it to hard outcomes, so we can make the case for anything. Make the case for change. Make the case for risk management. Make the case for performance, and so on. So all of those, for me, I'm afraid, are kind of okay, but it's not going to get us there. It hasn't got us there so far. Otherwise, remember my first page? We wouldn't have that many top, amazing brands that we trust on that list. So, where do we go from here? Well, before I go into the case study, I'm going to have to set just some basic definitions, get them right, and tell you what are the key 3 learnings, and then luckily move on to a case study to bring it all to life, bring it all together. The first thing I want to talk about is the difference between behaviors and outcomes. I've already kind of articulated that, and it might be simple, but not always so easy. So outcomes are really the actions we take. Apologies. Behaviors are the actions we take. So behaviors around expressiveness, am I likely to open up at work or not? Follow the rules, treat people fairly. Those are behaviors. And those are the foundation of the outcome, which is my second point on the slide. And outcomes tend to be the eminently measurable, whether it is recognition, performance, incidents, something went right, something went wrong, right? But they are heavily reliant on the actions. Of course, if we don't understand what led us to those outcomes, we might end up with shortcuts because we don't understand the journey. Even if you want to repeat something and you don't know the journey, you don't know what to do again, if it's great or it isn't. I would also articulate that the pure understanding of outcomes isn't great, but it must not be disassociated with that balance of understanding behaviors. So the combinational understanding of how we got there and what we got for it is important. If we only focus at behaviors as well, kind of it becomes meaningless. Accountability falls. So why are we doing what we're doing? But the minute you say, well, we're doing this because we're going to get these outcomes, then you have a complete equation, so to speak. People understand in the world of analytics how we're going to get there and why should I care. Essentially, the key words there that I will come on later on is leading and lagging indicators. I'll try and avoid very complex maths as I bring the power of culture analytics in a moment. So having done all of that research, what are the critical learnings that I have found that I can share with you today? To drive success, we do need to understand how we're getting that success. You know, what are the culture traits? And I'm going to focus a little bit deeper, be obvious, the behavioral traits that actually drove us to get the numbers, the greatness, or the incidents that we got. We've got to understand that journey. The second important lesson is that off-the-shelf models don't really work, I'm afraid. Don't just borrow from somebody else. Oh, we know that culture has worked for our competitor or for somebody else. Hey, we'll just borrow it and bring it. The uniqueness of what you've got, the uniqueness of the environment, your rules, your processes, your environment, those are critical, and those are unique to you. Culture is unique. It's just not robotic. You can't just borrow it from somewhere. So the cut, copy, and paste stuff might not quite get the outcome that you're after. And the third critical thing, which I would love to articulate, is leaders are the custodians for culture, but everybody in the organization is accountable. Every single person. It's odd, I've been in many, many organizations that I've done a lot of research with globally, and I often hear, well, it's only leaders that are accountable. No, it's everybody. But what does it really mean for leaders as soon as I say that? It's not good enough, leaders, that you champion the behaviors that we want. You have to create the environments for others to champion those behaviors. So often, I'm sure you hear leaders complain, say, well, I'm doing it while everyone else is doing it. Well, have you created that environment for others to follow suit? So those are really critical things for leaders to understand. So what do we want out of culture analytics? An example that I'll bring up. Well, we want insight. So why did it happen? With a focus on the why, if it's great or not so great. For us, the high insight stuff is not just a term. It's really about explaining the journey, is what I'm trying to say. Ultimately, actionable insight is important. So if we want to change it, what are we going to do about it? Is it the place or is it the people? Is it both? And the foresight becomes quite important now. So if we know the leading indicators, can we find them somewhere else in the organization? Because it could be leading indicators for greatness or something that we want to stop happening before it happens. So with that in mind, if we want to drive change, what are our allies? What are we going to work on? The three things we can work on is capability for the people. So are they capable to enact those behaviors or not? And when it comes to place, we talk about opportunity. Have we given the opportunity to enact those behaviors? And have we motivated them? That's, I think, a lot of you might have heard of the COM-B model. That's it, really, capability, opportunity, motivation. Those are your allies for change. So the case study. I want to talk about how it comes together in the world of culture analytics. So before we visit that organization, which is a tech organization that's been growing out of a small startup and grown, it's kind of mid-sized now. Essentially, it was about behavioral measurement. 30 factors all told are relevant. And why? Because the research has showed me that 30 factors of behavior are critical in driving culture. And it's about measuring the people and the place. We've got to understand the context at which those behaviors happen or don't happen. So do people know how to enact those behaviors? Does the place support it or stop it? Essentially, we want to connect that. Of course we do. What are we going to connect it to? And to understand the how into the what and where. So what has happened or didn't happen, and where in the organization it's happening. That is really the whole analytics journey that I'm going to bring you in. And essentially, and if you have one set of behavioral data that are leading indicators, can we connect it to a plethora of outcomes, what we call culture themes? I often hear people talk about risk culture, safety culture, innovation culture, all in isolation. Well, they're all culture. It's just what prism are you looking? What's the outcome that you're looking through? And can I bring it all together? Which I would show you that you can actually bring it together. And onto the workforce analytics that will include culture. So this organization was interested in many outcomes. They are there listed. So it's about accountability. Are they being coached well? Are they effective in the work they do? Do they have psychological safety? So a plethora of outcomes that they were being challenged at. Now, for each of those, including performance, which you'll be glad to know, it's the hard metrics. So some of those, which I won't talk about here, are soft metric, hard metrics. Essentially, I want to know for each of those themes, what is a predictor for that theme? What behaviors are a predictor if we're going to talk about culture in the context of behavior? And can I connect all of those themes together? Are they, in fact, connected? Is there what we call path to greatness unique to our organization? And one example that I did bring here about working effectively. So what behaviors would help us work effectively? And I know it's difficult to look at sometimes predictive models in terms of regression analysis and all that, but here we've got an easy way to understand it. 4 behaviors, which are listed there, are a predictor for working effectively. So where those 4 behaviors are present, we are, I can't remember the number, almost 10 times more likely to work effectively. However, the absence of those behaviors, as you can see in the red, we are far less likely to be effective in the work that we do. So it becomes easy to explain to people, look, if we're going to focus on those behaviors, that's how likely we are. And we repeated this for each of the outcome themes. Ultimately, we joined all the themes together. And luckily, through great analytics, we have found that there is a journey. Why this slide is important, it brings the behaviors that predict each stage of that journey, and it shows us the journey that in fact starts with work-life balance. That's unique to this organization, so don't borrow it. In fact, if we get that right, then we get people being able to sustain and be effective at the work they do. If we get that right, we get accountability right. Then we get psychological safety right. Then we get recognition around here. And people are well coached for the work they do. So imagine for an organization that thought coaching was the key driver, and that's the beginning of your journey. And what we're saying here, actually, no, you're going to get a lot of stuff right before you even get to that bit. So effectively, now you've got a culture journey for them. Some of the behaviors that drive them in that path are present, some are absent. Anything in green tick, it means it's present, so we don't need to worry about it, but some are absent. What about the return on investment? So there are 4 behaviors they need to focus on. So what will we get back for it? And that's an easy slide to show anybody in any leadership or any position. It's like, look, if we just focus on 4 behaviors, we are likely to get a plethora of outcomes. It's just 8 here, but actually you could end up with 20, 30, 40 outcomes. Normally leaders feel a little bit overwhelmed when you're telling them, here are 8 outcomes, 20 outcomes, 30 outcomes. I want you to achieve all of them. But you can make the story a lot easier. So look, we're going to just focus on 4 behaviors, and here's why. They are the leading indicators, they're predictor. And if you want to know the factorial, you can see it there. So some of them are 20 times, 30 times, 50 times more likely to get that outcome. So now we know why we're focusing on the behavioral change and those behaviors. Now, hopefully sharp-eyed eyes have noticed that there is an outcome missing, which is performance. And you may wonder, well, we saw that, you talked about it, so where it is in the journey. So it's not in the journey, and you may wonder why. Well, here's something to think about. The performance management actually is reliant on the presence of 4 behaviors. 2 of those behaviors, which is consolidate and self-focus, are against the behaviors that drive their outcome. In fact, I'm 14 times more likely to get a great performance reward around here if I exhibit those 4, and sadly 2 are working against the outcomes. So imagine that actually the performance management system in this organization is not connected to driving the culture, but the outcomes that they really want. And I'll leave you with a very important, and I love this saying that I'm borrowing from the former IBM CEO about the importance of culture. It is actually the game itself. And it's so critical to understand that, because without that, you can just drive skill, you can just drive knowledge, but really culture becomes the enabler. I think that's a word that we're going to share today to driving all what we want. Thank you very much for listening. We'll hand it back to questions. Do you need that?
Thank you, Hani, and thank you, Carl, for your presentations. We're now open for Q&A. You can write your question on the platform or put your hand up. And whilst you think about your question, I'm going to use my speaker's prerogative to ask Carl a question, and then Hani next. So Carl, you've talked through the journey that Vodafone went through, identifying the key skills and prioritizing which ones, and how you got to the intervention that you decided to do. Is a skills-based approach to workforce planning necessary in every single context? Whether you're SME or whatever industry you are, what would you say to that?
It's so I think from our perspective, skills do cut across absolutely everything. So I think you have to adopt a kind of a skills-based lens going in. I think where you can flex it is the level of intensity of which you go to. So if you think about our Africa business right now, where we're really focusing on financial services, so fintech, we're really doubling down on what skills are going to be most critical for that particular business. It's a super tight market, so we are overly investing in skills and capability in that space. In other areas, we're probably a little bit lighter right now, and then you have to make some prioritizations, some choices around where you want to invest. I think there's also something around. So we spent quite a bit of time on our job architecture, which is quite a big piece of work to get that kind of sorted and in the right place before it goes into kind of a digital platform. So we've also made some choices around, again, the level of intensity, the depth of skills you want to kind of really focus into. You're really focusing on a role, or are you focusing on some macro skills? And we've made some choices around, for certain roles it's more macro, for other roles it's a bit more micro. Thank
you. And at what point would you say, depending on the organization, if you're thinking, okay, I need to think about skills in my organization, and okay, Carl says I need to think about, the intensity of, like, I go down to depends on, what resource I have and so on, and, which critical skills are in the company. So next thing is, clearly technology is one of the levers to help you in planning that. At what point is it particularly helpful for an organization to start thinking, actually, I need to leverage tech to help me with organize this? Yeah, so for us, tech gave us the scale. So it gave us a consistent experience that you could scale. But the key word I think you mentioned there was the enabler. It is an enabler to something. It is a tool. Exactly. The conditions in the organization have to be right and ready for it. When we launched Grow My Experiences, it was with a massive kind of fanfare internally. Isn't this a wonderful thing for our employees? And it is, but if no one's using it, no one's adopting it, you're not really going to get the benefit from it. And that's where the leadership piece and the cultural piece becomes really kind of a key enabler to really helping the adoption. Mm-hmm. Thank you. So I guess what my key takeaway from that point you say is you don't necessarily have to be a big business to start thinking tech. It's actually, would it be helpful in my case to actually leverage it or not?
Yeah, I think every business can adopt it. Again, it's just different levels.
Okay, thank you. I can see a hand up there. Just a minute, I will get to you. Hani, we talked about culture and ethics and prioritizing. That's another thing, because I noticed common to both of you. It's like there's tons of things we could do. Let's prioritize and which ones, and it's the ones that deliver most value. So you presented some numbers there. Is this 20 times, 30 times more likely? Briefly, without showing us the maths, how do you measure which ones were more influential? These are the top three, that we should focus on.
Yeah, that is really important, what analytics should give you. So the whole point of connecting the behaviors to the outcomes is what will give you the priority. But each organization is unique. That path I just shared may seem even, you think, oh yeah, that looks like common sense. Shall we just all adopt that? No. Those are unique to that organization. And that's why I have not found yet in all my 20 years of research, I could have ever said it is exactly the same behaviors and the same path for any two organizations. And I have worked with many of all different sizes all around the world. So that is unique to the connectivity. And if you don't have the data to connect, then you obviously got to make sure that you get your KPIs right, because you do need to connect those up. And that's why it becomes unique. Those 4 or 5 critical behaviors become important for your journey.
Yes. Yeah, thank you very much, Annie. Yes, let's go to the question at the back there, hand in the middle there. Yep.
Hi, so this is maybe a question to Carl, but it would be good to get your perspective, Hani, as well. Really interesting conversation. Great to hear what Vodafone is doing. The thing that struck me most is the idea of integrating your recruitment and your learning. So I'm also in the tech industry, and one of the things we find hardest is obviously the skill set is in high demand, so we tend to end up sort of headhunting. But I just wanted to understand, what's the uptake been of people using that whole process? Because I assume it's actually longer. So do you still get key talent willing to go through the process of the learning in order to get the role?
Yes, it's a great question. So we've been, again, we're always on a bit of a journey. Technology is always moving forward. So when we launched kind of the Grow platform that brought together both talent acquisition and kind of the learning piece, that was about 2 years ago. Over the last 2 years, our recruitment hiring time, so the time to hire people, has gone down by about 50%. So we're able to kind of find candidates faster and quicker. I think I guess one of the things that we're noticing, I think, as we've been evolving kind of the platform over time, is how do you make candidates kind of completely, your internal candidates completely aware of all the opportunities which are available. So you've got some candidates internally that will actually kind of proactively go on, complete their skills assessment, they're getting recommendations pushed them, both learning and internal jobs, but that hasn't reached the entire workforce yet. We're at about 40%. So for us then it's around how do you go from 40% to 60% of your internal candidate base. There's also kind of moments where you may consciously want to go externally. You want to kind of refresh the pipeline. You may not have the skills internally because building takes longer. And I guess that's where the planning piece begins to kind of kick in around what is the right blend and balance between the buy versus the build. So it is really helping, but there are some strategic kind of conversations that need to happen around it for each business unit that we partner with.
Okay, thank you. Another question for Carl. You talked about supporting experience, but also job architecture. Is Vodafone moving towards using a skills-based approach to projects rather than job roles? So the granularity of it.
Yeah, no, we have focused on generic jobs, so that's kind of where we've gone to, and then looked at the skills architecture that fit with the jobs.
Thank you. And another one, in Vodafone, Vicky Quake asks, have you seen fewer redundancies? Yet based on your ability to de-skill and therefore provide more job security?
Yeah, it's good to take Italy as an example. So we put 3,000 frontline workers through kind of upskilling programs around how to manage more complex customer queries, and that hasn't led to job reductions, but we really partnered with our union partners in order to make sure that the reskilling opportunities were there and the upskilling opportunities were there. So the answer to that question is no, we don't, but we are finding that the humans that you have do need some different skills, and they are learnable, but you have to go on a bit of a journey.
I can see a hand on, 2 hands, possibly 2 there. We'll take these questions there.
Hello, I've got a question for Hanny, please. You spoke about accountability for culture needing to be diffuse across an organisation and not just sitting with leaders. And you spoke about it being a responsibility for leaders to create the environment where others will take responsibility for cultural impact. I just wondered what you would see as the observable behaviours of a leader who is creating that environment. So what does it mean in practice to create an environment?
Yeah, that's a million-dollar question almost. But can I just simplify it into an example, maybe an everyday example, to bring it to life? Imagine a leader that's trying to drive recycling. And there's one bin, probably near that particular leader for recycling, and says, look, I'm showing everybody I'm doing this. Every day, take my recycle, shred it, whatever, do all the right things. Why is it not happening? And the truth is that, well, this is a huge flaw. You should need to have many recycling bins around for others to not just see what you're doing, but the ability, the opportunity to actually partake in this program. And then you start talking about it to motivate them. So, wow, look, this week we recycled, we saved I don't know how many hundreds of trees. You could start bringing a celebration to motivate people about the needs for recycling. So it's a simple example of them doing it, but you have to create the environment. So that ultimately creating the environment, as you can take this go, for people to express themselves openly, in meetings. Does everybody feel safe to be able to bring any topic, or you're going to shut them down? A lot of the times, sadly, I've been in meetings, it's pretty scary, where a leader might actually make certain people speaking up about topics uncomfortable. Dare I say, people who are bringing up issues may feel humiliated, and that you just lost them forever. So you didn't create that opportunity where people could express themselves. So it is so critical to think about the design. I call it culture by design. You design everything else in your company, don't you? You design your financial systems, your office furniture, your IT systems. How many people have actually got a culture plan or a real culture by design, thinking about an environment that drives the behaviors we want? Because we want those, because it drives our outcomes. Connect it all up, a connected system. Very few, I'm afraid.
Okay, one more question, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, it leads on nicely from what you were saying, because I often think about causation and correlation when it comes to culture. And do we have any research that shows direct causation of a cultural outcome from an action that's been designed to create that cultural outcome. Because I think that's a difficulty. With the other things we talk about, you can show direct causation, but it's really hard in culture.
Yeah, absolutely. I do worry about the term correlative or causative. But sadly, what happens when I've seen it go wrong is that we clutch on one outcome only, and we just say, yeah, for that theme, one metric, oh wow, look at this. You know, whenever these behaviors are present, we're getting this. And that's not enough evidence. You do need per theme multiple outcomes to really, once you have created the true regression analyses rather than correlation analyses, you can really know it's a one-way street and not the other way. So now you've got a few behaviors that are driving multiple outcomes within just one theme. So speak up culture is multiple metrics. Performance is multiple metrics. It cannot be just one. And that's where we got to move away from true hard evidence, I urge, of being causative, you know, correlative to being causative. Obviously, with path analysis, if you're interested, I didn't mention it here, but it is true structural equation modeling done. So you've got every possible scenario is being attributed in order to understand the best true parsimonious path, if you like, to greatness. Yeah? But very good question.
Thank you both. If you're interested in learning more about evidence-based HR and cultural analytics, and generally more generally about evidence-based HR, we do have in the insights as part of the conference exhibition, it's called Evidence Labs. I believe it's down in the charter section. So if you look up online, rather than the conference section, the insight stage area, there is a section of Evidence Labs. There's practitioners and academics getting together. And I think some of them are also psychologists. So if you're interested in exploring more around behavioral science, that's a good place to congregate as well. On that, I would like to thank both Hani and Carl for the expertise and time, and thank you all for your questions. Before you go, do take note that we do have special discounts for some of the learning courses, 15% if you're attending, plus additional discounts, a total of 30% if you're a member. Thank you all for coming, and thank you for participating. Thank you.